Well, I really don't understand how YouTube works. It's funny to me how you get the views and the comments that you do on the video. You know, how some videos will be popular and others won't, and whatever. I'm not complaining about it, just saying I just don't understand, you know, what happens. And with me, and what's prompting this is that I've made lots of pro-libertarian, anti-government, anti-socialism videos. Lots and lots and lots. It's like almost every video on my channel. And typically, though, most of the people who watch, who comment, who subscribe, are like-minded people, more or less. You know, usually not on every single issue, but on most. So it strikes me as odd that I would then make a video that has the words Ottoman and Janissary in the title, and that would draw a statist or a socialist. I can't tell for sure which, or, you know, if he's a socialist, definitely a statist. You'd think that that would come out, you know, in some video that had the word socialism in its title. But anyway, I got a commenter on one of my videos, and it's a user that I don't recognize. I don't think he's a sub, but I didn't check. And I don't recall seeing comments from him or her anywhere else. And when I looked at their channel, I didn't immediately reveal all that much to me, but they post the following. Let's see. Yeah, it sure is unfortunate for the people of China that they had a class of administrators who were actually selected for talent. And then he finishes the paragraph. Libertarianism is a joke. It completely misses how states are part of group evolutionary strategies. Now, there's two issues there. They're related, and I like to address them both. First, a little bit on what he's referring to. In my video on Janissaries and the Ottoman Empire, I was basically using the Janissaries as an example of one of the reasons why bureaucracies fail. There's two reasons the government can't deliver its promises. One is it doesn't have the knowledge. Two is the incentives are such that it doesn't perform its tasks very well, if at all. And I use the Janissaries as an example. They start off with very skilled soldiers, but before you know it, they're just fat bureaucrats who are a overt leech even on the state, let alone on the society at large. And he's bringing up the example of these Chinese technocrats, basically. The imperial Chinese bureaucracy had, for administrators, they would, I believe, almost exclusively select eunuchs. And there was basically an entrance exam, which is usually considered the hardest or most difficult entrance exams ever. And these weren't entrance exams like you fought gladiatorial combat or demonstrated original thinking or anything like that. It was more just you had to possess encyclopedic knowledge. You probably had to do math, although I don't know the details on the tests. And it's interesting because people aren't born eunuchs, obviously. There was a whole industry of physicians who would actually perform the surgery where they would castrate people who wanted to apply. And it's my understanding this was actually very hazardous. A lot of people would get infected and become very ill and actually die. It was very, very risky. And then you would take the test, and if you did well enough, you could get in the state bureaucracy. Now, why would you risk, you know, death, let alone losing your nuts, and any chance of having future children, among other things, to get a job? And the answer is that the pay was very, very good. In fact, it was even opulent. And if you were really good at it, and if you rose to the top of the bureaucracy, you would basically be living like royalty. But I think that amendment's missing some points here. One, it's obvious that the reason people would go through that was not because they wanted to help the people of China and wanted to be altruists. Clearly the motivation is the pay, or perhaps the political power some of them may have wanted. That's why they did it. It would be different and if they didn't get paid, if they were just volunteering. It's also interesting, why are they getting castrated? Well, it's because the emperor has a harem and he doesn't want to have there be any doubt as to who's getting pregnant and whose the children are. He doesn't want contested heirs, and he doesn't want anyone messing with his wives. And that should clue you in that the bureaucracy of China and the government of China isn't geared towards the well-being of, Chinese society at large. It's there to serve the emperor and the bureaucrats. I mean, they're doing it so that they can be wealthy and they can make money. But I want to come back to a few larger issues of that in a bit. But then he says that libertarianism fails to realize that, let me quote him exactly, it is a joke because it completely misses how states are part of group evolutionary strategies. Now, in a very broad and general sense, I do not disagree with this. Just like I think that it is completely arbitrary to say that human activity and human society is somehow extra-natural or unnatural. I don't see what the distinction is between saying, oh, the Maasai or a Bushman in the Kalahari, that's natural, but if I drive a car or in a plane, it's not. Nature doesn't have a set of rules that says that you can't be a successful species and that you can't use tools or technology, or that a certain amount of tools. I mean, are sea otters unnatural because they use stones to open up sea urchins? Are chimpanzees unnatural because they use twigs to ferret out ants or sticks to beat each other with? And you might say that the difference in degree between that kind of tool use and what we do is enormous, and of course be correct, but that still means that the distinction is arbitrary. So states were not imposed on humanity from outside sources, unless of course you're Von Daniken and then you believe that aliens did it from planet X or whatever. But aside from that, nobody believes that states did anything other than arise from within society generally. And in that sense, yes, they're natural. And to the extent that evolution plays a role in society, which I would argue it plays a huge role in society, then yes. Obviously, humans are not evolved in a way that prevents them from ever forming states, because we have states. But this argument, I think, is too general and it misses a whole bunch, because on the same token that says, well, there's states, and that states are, quote, natural, I can make the argument that, well, free market capitalism is also natural, as is anarchism. Since through most of human history there has been anarchism, and there's still a little bit today, and there has been some through the historic period. I mean, it's not like when the first states emerged, whatever they did, whether it was in Egypt or Mesopotamia, at some point a state happened someplace. Well, at that moment, only a couple people in that area had states, and the rest of the people didn't. And I haven't really tried to calculate it, but I think that you would be talking well into late antiquity before you get to the majority of people living under a state. And it's not like free markets and capitalism was surreptitiously inserted by some evil mad scientist. It's not like Murray Rothbard or Mises, or more likely if you're a liberal to think about it, Adam Smith, like thought, ooh, what's the aberrant thing I can invent to hurt the natural order because I hate, because I'm a swine who hates the poor people, and then invented free market capitalism. No, all free market capitalist economists that I'm aware of couch it in terms of it's evolutionary and it's descriptive. They're describing things that they see happening. They see mutual exchange, they see barter, they see money being used, how is it being used. It's not something that they said, how can we invent something that we'd like to see done? It's them describing something that they would characterize as natural. And indeed, the anarchist philosophers, as far as I'm aware, all couch their terminology in things like nature and evolution. Hans Hermann Hoppe and Rothbard refer to natural law, natural order, emergent order is a popular term, and there's no way that you could say, well, states are natural, but free market capitalism, that's not natural. That's from Mars. No, it's not from Mars either. They're both there, and we have to navigate the waters of our society a little bit more discreetly than to just say, Humans do it, hence it's natural, hence it's justified, and just we libertarians don't get it. What I don't get is, if that's your argument, that states are justified because that, like, based on a tautology that since they exist they must be okay, then that argument would apply to all states everywhere and all acts every state has ever done. So there would be no basis whatsoever to point to the worst atrocities ever committed and say, oh, that's unnatural, that's wrong, because those were states, and so those are people, in his words, naturally, like, groups organizing for, let's see, group evolutionary strategies. No. There's no, you can't have that be your guiding philosophy and condemn anything. I mean, literally anything, and not just what states do. I mean, if I see someone raping somebody else, I'd say, hey, it's just natural, right? He's a human, he's doing it. There's no way to say, oh, that's aberrant, he got that from, I don't know, the aliens told him to do it. No, I mean, that's natural too. And so this argument really doesn't get you anywhere. There's other problems with it too. This idea that states are groups coming together. I think this is false because it ignores the role of coercion. If one person coerces another person, let's say I go and I steal somebody's car. You know, I pull him out, yank him out, punch him, jump in his car, and drive away. Would it make any sense whatsoever to say that the two of us got together to cooperate so that I can have transportation? No. I coerced that person and stole their car, and there was no cooperation whatsoever. There was coercion, and I used his resources against his will, but you can't call that working together in any meaningful sense. Well, theoretically, libertarians point this out all the time, and empirically it's the case that states always rely on coercion. Now, how overt it is, how often, and, you know, it varies with time and with place and with the states, but it's always there. They always use it at some level, and whenever they do, the whole argument that it's people coming together goes out the window, becomes erroneous at that point. You could still say it's natural. You know, like we could say, see a chimpanzee kill another chimpanzee and say that's natural, but you couldn't say that the chimpanzees were cooperating with each other. You'd have to say, no, that one attacked the other one and killed it, and then ate the rest of its food or whatever it killed, whatever reason, if any, it gave. States are coercive. And like I said, it's not always as overt as, say, the abolition of the kulaks or the you know, killing all the Indians in the United States. But even like in even the nice little states like Liechtenstein, Luxembourg. One example, there's a video on YouTube actually from Iceland, and you know, Iceland, cops don't carry guns. There's no homicide rate. They all kind of are genetically the same. They're extremely homogenous. And it's a great video because the guy goes out, the state in Iceland has a monopoly on liquor. I think restaurants can sell it, but if you want to buy liquor in a store, you have to get it at a state store. And a budding young anarcho-capitalist there, who my understanding is actually the son of one of the Supreme Court justices, thought that this was wrong. And he went in the middle of the town, and he put out a table with a whole bunch of beers on it, and he started to sell beers. And the police showed up, and they were nice, but they took all the beers, and they arrested him and took him away. Now, would you say that they were cooperating together, or would you say that the police coerced him? Obviously, they coerced him. To say that otherwise is to completely mischaracterize the situation. Now, returning to his point about China and tying the two together, I'm sure that the technocrats in the Chinese bureaucracy were very knowledgeable and very good technocrats. However, His argument fails when he puts in the conjunction that obviously it benefited the Chinese people. No, obviously the eunuchs benefited themselves and the state, which is not the same thing. In my video on the Janissaries, the Janissaries were effective soldiers for a long time. They were very good at what they did. Does that mean that they helped the Ottoman people? No, it does not. Or another example, a cliched one, but I'll use it in a different way. The German general staff in World War II of the Wehrmacht were super competent. They were the most bellicose and effective military machine in the world up to that date, I would say. Maybe ever for their time. Super professional, super motivated, super loyal, super intelligent. I think in the United States, our best 1 or 2 generals maybe might have been able to be generals in the Wehrmacht, but the rest of them wouldn't have even been able to compete. If you go down the list of their generals, they're just genius, 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 genius. But do you think that the Wehrmacht in World War II served the interests of the German people? I would argue that they didn't. These eunuchs in China who are so amazing, when they spent a decade or more, I think it took 14 years, don't quote me on that, to build the Forbidden City, which is one of, if not the biggest palaces in the entire world. When they taxed millions of Chinese people and expropriated the labor from millions of Chinese people, thousands of whom may have died in the process, and raised the cost of living for all of them, so that the emperor could live in conspicuously more opulence than he already was, which was already higher than anybody else in history. How is that benefiting the Chinese people? Yes, the bureaucrats are very talented. Yes, they're great administrators. I'm sure the architects who built the pyramids were really interesting, smart guys. And I'm sure the foremen who whipped the slaves, who pulled the half-ton or ton-and-a-half blocks to the top, were really good motivational speakers and probably had a lot of technique with their lash. But that doesn't mean that the pyramids were beneficial to the Egyptian people at all. And we can go down the list, and it's long. It's long. When Louis XIV goes to his people and he says, I demand that all of you pay 10% on all of your wealth, like calculate your house, all your property, and give it to me so that I can build myself a palace better than the Forbidden City, so I can build Versailles, a place he probably never even went to every room. Are you telling me that that's just people coming together to solve society's problems, and the French people should be thankful for that? No. And you might say, but see, the whole evolutionary argument doesn't allow us to object to any of that. It doesn't allow us to say, oh yeah, that doesn't count. Building a palace doesn't count. Because they can make an argument that, Louis XIV, he's impressing foreign dignitaries. He's showing how great France is. To use my favorite example, the Assyrians. They built a big palace in Nineveh and Nimrod. What was the point? To impress foreigners. So, yes, they're whipping people and enslaving people and murdering people and taking their wealth. I mean, literally, like, just going and ransacking a village and taking everything. But it's for their own good so that they can impress foreigners in their lavish settings. I mean, you can make that argument. And obviously, whenever you watch a show on the pyramids and they ever discuss, like, the labor, they'll say, like, well, yeah, they were slaves and it didn't directly help them, but it made Egypt great and it help them be nationalistic. Like, oh, well, isn't that putting the cart away? I thought the state was there to help society, not vice versa. And, I mean, the hypocrisy here is astounding. The argument that he makes would not condemn any of this. So, like, I hate to keep using examples, but it just strikes me as necessary to illustrate that I'm not just coming from some libertarian theocracy here, theocratic background. Like, so Ramses II conscripts thousands and thousands of Egyptians. He marches them across the desert into Syria, fights a big battle against another king. Well, some thousands, about 4,000 or 5,000 of them die horrible deaths. You know, who knows who gets wounded or whatever. Just so he can have bragging rights. Just so he can get a little richer or act like he's a big man, right? That's helping the Egyptian people? I don't think so. Now, how about when he comes home, and then when they get home, instead of letting them be, he enslaves them again and makes them build a temple in his honor for a victory he didn't actually fight in. I mean, he claims that he did, but who could take that seriously? You know, Obama might as well have come out and said he actually shot bin Laden in the head. You know, has these people slave away to build giant temples to glorify himself. Is that helping the Egyptian people? No. And you might say, well, what about well, the same thing? It's the same thing with roads and education and the military now. It's all to serve the state. That's why it's there. If it was really that good for the people, they wouldn't have to use taxation. They wouldn't have to use the lash. It wouldn't be necessary. It's not necessary for all the other goods we have that we don't get from government. That is people coming together. That is cooperation. So the other problem with this whole evolutionary argument is, okay, let's accept it. I'm not saying it's a problem because I don't think it's wrong. I just don't think it really does anything to justify states, really. It certainly doesn't injustify libertarianism, that's for sure, as he implies very self-righteously. You can say, okay, fine. We had a state. We had a stage where we needed states, just like we had a stage where we were hunter-gatherers, or a Mesolithic stage or a Neolithic stage, and the next stage is we don't need government. Well, if you're going to tout this New Ageism, then you can't really object to that. You have to say, well, you could be right. Now, that doesn't mean that you are right, but you have to concede that, well, maybe libertarians have a point, but they won't. Addendum 04, I highly doubt will do that. He'll probably say, no, we are always going to need a state. The only question is, how. Probably thinks we need more direct democracy. I'm not sure, which would be kind of ironic considering he just defended the Emperor of China. It's a real common thing. I don't want to say states are unnatural, but that doesn't mean that they're inevitable, because they didn't always exist. They don't need to exist now. And they certainly don't benefit all the people. That's more demonstrable, I think, than the more vague claims about evolution. And they're demonstrably also for the interests of the people in the state. Empirically, it's a fact that governments exist to benefit themselves. They all receive pay. They all receive perks in terms of privilege and social class. There are empirical studies that show that prosecutions cycle the same as elections. So prosecutors, you could say that's us coming together to solve crime or whatever, but really they up their convictions the October before November elections all the time. Like, statistically, it's a fact. And the only explanation is because it looks good. And so they'll throw people away, innocent people away, just to get reelected all the time. And, Obama builds the roads with the signs on it. That's just like Ramses building a temple about how he beat the Hittites. It's just him taking credit for something. He's using our labor and our money, and he's saying how great he is because he expropriated it all. It's not us coming together at all. I mean, you might say that the people who were in government, they came together. I mean, you and I can hatch a conspiracy to go rob somebody else, but that doesn't mean the three of us are coming together. It means the two of us came together and screwed somebody else. That's what states are. And the thing is it's hard to screw a lot of people if you're a minority, and so you have to make up some kind of BS to justify it. And in the past, it was blatantly religious. I did a whole video on that too. They said, "Oh, the gods say we have to." Now there's this whole social contract theory. It's just as bogus. I mean, yeah, it's true that if the pharaoh died, the sun would still rise. That's true. But people think that if we didn't have a government, we would all become homicidal maniacs and proceed to kill each other without, immediately, without any self-control whatsoever. And that's just as absurd. As is the notion that certain goods are market failures and that we can't have them otherwise. Since all of them, we can argue about whether there's ever been true anarcho-capitalism. But every good that you can name has been provided either where there isn't a state or where the state didn't provide it. And the argument that certain things are market goods always reflects conservative bias. So market failures. Whatever it is the state provides in a certain area, people assume that that's a market failure. So although lots of people in the United States want us to have universal health care, they will admit that it's not required, that you can have health care without universal health care. But you go to Europe and they don't think that. They think that without there would be no such thing. And if you go, I mean, lots of former Eastern Bloc people were just aghast. Like, where does the food come from if they're not going to have state factories? You know, where? And if the government takes over computer production in 20 years, Addendum's going to be asking, well, if we didn't have the government, how would we have laptops? Or self-defense. Yeah, well, it's called getting a gun, man. I mean, I don't want to come down too hard because I really don't know them, but I just think it's an interesting argument to say that it's evolutionary, but it doesn't really disprove libertarianism at all, and it's vague as it is. It would justify everything any state has ever done, and I don't know if anybody is comfortable. I don't care how statist you are; you can't really be comfortable with that. And if you're not comfortable with it, then maybe you shouldn't use it as your basis for dismissing, libertarianism. Because if what the state was doing was really so great, they wouldn't need a whip to make us go along with it, or a taser nowadays.